So if you have any issue with the link, you start installing it now, it's going to take a while, which means you're going to have to set the database up after class. So I had posted this link on Blackboard, Management Studio. If that link doesn't work for you, just search for the word Management Studio. And it will probably, the first link you're going to get here, it says SQL Server Management Studio docs.microsoft.com. So it will take you here. This is the download page. So what you need if you don't already have installed is this first one that says download SQL Server Management Studio 17.2. Please don't click the second one. The second one will only work if you've already installed the first one. The second is an upgrade to the first. We don't really need the upgrade. So you get Management Studio from here. Management Studio is a program very much like MySQL Workbench. It allows us to connect to different SQL servers and manage our databases. But it's much better than MySQL Workbench, and I'll show you a few of these features. We'll look more at it next week. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, Management Studio shouldn't actually take that long to install. It's the server itself that needs a long time. If you don't have the server installed, that's fine. You can just use Azure. If you've installed the local server, I'll show you how to use it. So to open Management Studio, if you have it installed, I have an older version, which doesn't matter. When you open it up, the very first thing it does is ask you to log in. Now, if I sent out the link weeks ago asking you to install SQL Server on your machine, you don't have to have it, but it allows you to run a database locally, which is faster. So I'm going to show you how to connect locally, then I will show you how to connect to Azure. So if you don't have SQL Server already installed in your machine, you can't do this part today. If you do, here's how you connect to your local server. The server name is just in brackets local. And the authentication you can usually pick, you just pick Windows authentication, and you should be able to connect if you've installed a local copy of this. My local version uses my computer name, and I'm not using Windows authentication. I use SQL Server authentication. And the default login is SA, which stands for System Admin. So when you install SQL Server, there's an option in there that says, do you want to use Windows to authenticate, or do you want to connect with SQL Server authentication? If you accept the defaults, it just goes to Windows authentication, meaning you don't have to supply a username and password. I set mine up that even locally, I need a username and password. So I'll just hit connect. So this is what it looks like. Here's my local server. This is my computer name. And if I expand databases, here are all the databases that I've created. So I'm going to create a new one. So again, I'm going to do this both locally, and I'll do it again on Azure. So don't worry if you don't have a local server running. The process will be similar. To create a new database, I just click on Databases, right-click, and choose New Database. So I'm just going to call this COMP2084 Fall 2017. You can call the database anything you like, just don't put spaces in the name. This will create an empty database on my local database server. I am recording this, so if you're installing stuff, you can always catch up. So now I have a database. I can click on, oops, sorry, it adds it down at the bottom. And when I expand my tables, I see nothing, right? We've got a blank database. There's no tables, there's no data, there's nothing. I've put an SQL script on Blackboard that will build and populate all the 6 tables we need for the music store. So here's how to get it. And again, I'm going to redo this on Azure, so I'm going to have 2 copies. A local copy, and I'm going to then build the same database on Azure. And you can use either one. So in Blackboard, inside of weekly learning, I think I put it here. Yes, in week 4 for today, the first item says Music Store SQL script. So I'm just going to right-click that file, and I'll save it into my Music Store folder. Actually, I'll just put it right here, just outside my Music Store folder. There's no need to put the SQL file up on Git, although the git ignore might exclude it anyway. Doesn't really matter. Just save it somewhere to your computer. Doesn't really matter where it goes. Now we can use Management Studio to open the file and run the create and insert script. So if I just click on File, Open File, I can browse to that .SQL file. So here it is in my COMP2084. Here's the script I just got from Blackboard a minute ago. If I open that up, it'll just open it in the SQL query editor. So there's a bunch of create tables, and it will insert records into each table. And Raj, coming back to your question earlier about naming conventions, notice the database naming conventions are the same for SQL Server. They've used, obviously, it's all Microsoft, so they name things the same way, right? Now, when I connect here, before I execute this query, there's a little drop down here that says available databases. This defaults to my master database. I don't want to run the query in my master database. I want to run it in the COMP2084 database I just created. So if I just click the drop down, I'm going to pick my new database I just built. And now if I click execute, it'll should build the tables for me. So I'll just execute it. And it runs in like half a second. It tells me my query is done. So I should have 6 tables with data in them. Now when I click here over to my tables, notice it's still empty. There's a little refresh icon here. This little green refresh. So I choose my tables and click refresh now once it's done. And now here are all the tables. Album, artist, cart, genre. And we can look inside and see that the data is there. So I could just right-click any table and select, and it automatically writes and executes a select query. So we know the data is here now. So this is what we're going to, next week, we're going to replace genre 1, 2, 3 with this data instead. This is where it's going to come from. Tables are here. So this program is very similar to MySQL Workbench, but it's much better. It lets us do lots of things. Like let's say we want to change this table. In MySQL Workbench, I mean, we could do it. I could make a new query. And I could say, you know, like alter table. Genre, you know, add column. So I could write and execute queries this way, which is fine. But there's a much easier way. I could just right-click my table and choose design. Say I want to add some new columns. I can just type them in. New column, varchar. Don't allow nulls. If I want to set a primary key, there's a little primary key button here. Set it as a primary key. I want to set something as a unique identifier. It's all just in here. So if we're going to build a database from scratch, we don't have to write any SQL commands. We can just do it visually, which is much faster and reduces our errors to do it this way. I won't save that. I'll show you a couple other features that are new, that are in here. there's a database diagram. I think Workbench has this. So if I want to create a new diagram, I could add tables. And I can actually see all the relationships in an ERD because there are keys and relationships in the script. I can also write complicated queries. So let's say we want to write a query. I can go to view and create a new view. And rather than writing a SQL command, again, I could put all my tables on. So show me all of the genres, artists, and albums. I don't want to write the query and do a join. I could just add them and say, show me the genre name, album title, price, and artist name, and order this by album title. I can click, I can run my query, and it gives us all the results. So we can do this much faster than having to write the query ourselves. Last semester, we made you write the query so you knew how to do these things, but now we'll give you some tools to make it faster for you. Yep. I right-clicked on view and I chose new view. I can also save this query. So I've done this with many of my customers because like every month they want me to run a report. And I've said to them, well, I could build a web page where you could run the report on your own. And they said, no, I don't want to pay you for that. I just want to call you and say, Rich, can you run a report? So I just create the query and save it as a view. And anytime my customer wants me to run it, I just log into the database, click the view and execute it. And then I just take all this data, copy it, and I go here and do something like this. Paste it in, email it to my customer. Here you go, here's your report. Takes me 2 minutes. So there's a lot of other really powerful features in here. These are the ones we might use commonly. The table designer, the query builder. They save us a lot of time and a lot of coding. So I won't save that. But if I save it, then it's stored and I can just execute it anytime I want. So now we have our local music store database all set up. If you don't have the local server running, you can still install Management Studio, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to set it up on Azure. This won't take us very long. So in the Azure panel, if we go here, I'll click on, you can just click SQL Database. So I've already got 2, so I'll just click on Add. You probably have a big blue Add button here, which you can click. But if you click the Add button here at the top, it'll let us create a new database. So give it a name. You can use your existing resource group. You don't need a new one. It's going to be a blank database, and then we just have to configure the settings. So rather than Azure give us the server name and a username and password, we set those things up ourselves. But we have to put it in a file because these are your credentials. If you forget them, you have to basically reset them or start again. So I'm going to click on Configure Required Settings. I'll create a new server. So I'll just give it the same name as my database, COMP2084 Fall 2017. Create a username and password on Azure for your database. Now the location can be anywhere, and then I suggest you create a little text file with these credentials. because we'll need them in order to connect our ASP.NET application and also connect to the database through Enterprise Manager. So I'm just going to go in here to my music store directory. I'm just going to make a new text document, which I call access.txt. I do this for all my sites. I'm going to put in a host, DB name, username, password. Because if I don't, I won't remember them. I'll take my server name, always.database.windows.net. My database name is the same. Yes, I'm putting this on YouTube so you can see the password. I don't care, you break my database. I'm going to be annoyed, but I can just run the script again and recreate it. Build your own database, leave mine alone. Okay. So I'll save this so that next week when we connect our Visual Studio project to it, I have the credentials. Because if I forget them, I'm going to have to reset the password, which is a pain. I'd rather just store it. So then just set that stuff. I'll pin it to my dashboard so we can access it. So you'll get 32 megs per database in our free subscription. And I'll create the database. So it'll take a minute or two, and then it will create this blank database on Azure. And once that's done, I want to connect to it in Enterprise Manager and run the same script again. So I will build the same tables in my online database that I built in my local copy. My name already exists. So it doesn't like this resource name. So I may just have to make a new resource. Okay, that's fine. I'll do it again. No problem. Okay, so I'll just have to redo it with a different resource group. We'll call it COMP2084DB. Ah. We'll try again. We'll try one more time. So to add this server in Management Studio, as soon as it's done, we can try and connect from Management Studio to our Azure database, and then we can run the SQL script again. And then we have our live music store database. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to Management Studio. I want to add the server here, but I want to save my credentials so I can just connect to it in the future through here. I don't have to add my credentials. It'll save them. So the way this works is, under here, you've got this registered servers link. If you expand it, database engine and local server groups, here are all the servers that I've saved in the past because I manage a whole lot of SQL Server databases. So under here, I have an Azure group. You don't really need groups. And just wait till this is done. Hopefully it's done. Not yet. But as this runs, we can start to set up our connection. So you can just right-click the local server group and you choose New Server Registration. I'm going to do it inside of my Azure group, so all of my Azure database servers are together. So I'll right-click and choose New Server Registration. So your server name, well, that's the host you just created in the Azure panel. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in. I'll just give this in registered server name a friendly name, so COMP2084, all 2017. The authentication we have to change. We're not using Windows authentication for Azure. We need to change this authentication method to SQL Server authentication. Then I need my username and password. My login and the password I created in the Azure panel. Be sure you check remember password. Otherwise, every time you try and connect, you have to go find the password and put it in. You click remember, it will save your password in here. I don't want to click connect yet because until this is done. Okay, it says it's done now. So once my database is set up now successfully. So now I can test it. I'll try and connect. Okay, this is where I need to read the error message. It found the server, but it can't open it. Why can't it open it? What is that error telling you? The second sentence explains the problem. Yeah, by default, when you create a database on Azure, it doesn't allow remote connections. So we're trying to connect from our computer here at the college to Azure's database. And by default, it blocks all the IP addresses. To enable access, use the Azure portal. Just open a firewall rule. So we need to do this. We only need to do this once when we set a database up. So I'm going to click on my new database here. Where is it? So here's my database. And when I open it up, there's a link here that says set server firewall. I need to click that. Just click on your database, right on the overview page, set server firewall. So I'm going to create a firewall rule where I let any IP address that has the username and password can get in. So I'll just call my rule all. But we want to allow any IPs at all. It could allow my IP at school, but then it means if I try and connect from home, it won't work. This will allow all IP addresses, 0.0.0.0 the start, 255.255.255.255 the end. That's basically all IPs. If you have the username and password, you can get into the database. And then just click Save. So it says the firewall's been updated. Azure will now allow anybody with the right credentials to access the database. So now I can go back here and test it again, and it should connect. Yep. So the error goes away once I've allowed that access. And now I can save my connection.
If it says that database engine tuning advisor doesn't support Microsoft Azure SQL, how do I fix it?
I have to think about that one. Tuning advisor?
I have no idea what it is.
Haven't used it. So it shows up now in my list, and if I just double click it, it will connect to that server for me. So now I'm connected to two servers at the same time. Here's my local one. I'll just close that up. Here's my Azure one. And if I expand databases here, this is the database I just created. But notice the tables are empty again. So I can just get the script the same way. If I click on File, open my SQL file, I can open oh, whoops, I'm in the wrong window. That's still my local server. Whoops, sorry. I'll close that up. I'll close this. I'm going to disconnect from my local server. Now I'm only connected to Azure. And I'll run it again. So I'll open the file. I'll choose my Azure database, which has a slightly different name, and execute the script. And it should build those tables on Azure. So you don't really need the database in both places, but you need it in one or the other. So it took 11 seconds to run, and now if I refresh my tables, I have all the data in my Azure database as well. So it is slower connecting to Azure, but it means when I push my code online, if I'm connected to Azure, my code's going to work. Deploying the web application isn't going to work if we're using a local database. So my suggestion is it's a little slower, but if you can connect to Azure, it would probably be better, because that way you can post all your work online. So I've got 2 copies. Next week, we're going to connect our Visual Studio project up to our database. I'm going to use my Azure database. I'm not going to use my local database. So that way, when I publish my code each week, things will run online for me. So before next week, here's what I want to do. If you do not have Azure access, I'd like you, when you get Greg to set up your account, when you can get in, send me an email and say, okay, I've got my Imagine access and I've set up Azure. If you don't have it set up before next Tuesday, I'd like you to come to office hours as soon as Greg sets up your account. If you watch the video and you can't get it set up, because I want everybody to be able to have all their access during next week's class. So I have office hours Wednesday, I have office hours Thursday, and I can be around next Monday, and I have office hours next Tuesday before class. So everybody needs to have this set up before next week. So in next week's class, what we're going to do is use Visual Studio to generate all of the models from our SQL server. And then we're going to start working with real data in our music store rather than the fake data that we've been making. I'm also at the start of class going to give you assignment 1. So I'm going to give it to you next week. I know the syllabus says it's due next week. I'm going to change it because we missed the class. So your assignment 1 will be due in 2 weeks. Give it out next week. It's not that big. You only have a week to do it though. But your environment has to be set up so that you can work. Okay, so I'm going to stop my video stream. I've got about a little bit of time. We have a bit of time left, so I will do some troubleshooting for whoever still needs it.